Okay. Now I'm in the dark. Okay, a little better. Okay. Reinforcement. So we just did like all the basics of reinforcement and what it is, and then this is kind of talking about like in the therapist or the behavior tech's responsibility when it comes to reinforcement. So this is just a review. Reinforcement is defined functionally. What is a reinforcer? Everyone.
Something that makes the behavior increase.
Ooh, ooh. When it comes after it.
Booyah.
And that's like basically think about something that makes the behavior increase, but another important part is when it follows the behavior. And then so to find out, you have to do preference assessments. The most important of your job is reinforcement, and it makes the difference between an awesome therapist and a meh therapist or behavior technician. Use differential reinforcement, which is that like bigger, better, different behaviors get different levels of different reinforcement. And then you can use tokens to take advantage of highly preferred items or activities that might take longer than the time that you have in a discrete trial. So think of it as three main responsibilities. Number one, it goes back to that definition of reinforcement, meaning that it makes the behavior increase. So you have to always constantly assess, am I being reinforcing? Is this stimuli that I'm using actually a reinforcer? And then this is, the main focus of this training will be that the behavior tech's job is to encourage new reinforcers and to push for age-appropriate reinforcers and naturally occurring reinforcers, such as praise and peer interaction. So your job here is to identify them and also to create them, and the way you create them is through pairing and also increasing skills. And then your third responsibility is to consider appropriateness. Like you've found out that 10 marshmallows is a reinforcer for clapping. So every time the kid claps throughout the session, you're going to give them 10 marshmallows, and it might be effective, but it might not be very appropriate for yeah. Might not be healthy. Yeah. So for the first one, am I actually reinforcing? You want to constantly assess whether what you're doing is reinforcing, and we talked about this a little bit the last time. So the way you do this is you do a preference assessment. So you can do this pre-task, post-task, like we talked about. You definitely want to do it when responding decreases. So say you're using bubbles and you're using like a squishy toy to switch off while you're reinforcing, and you see responding decrease a little bit. So then what you would do is just like, hey, do you want these? And then if the learner picks one of them, you're like, okay, maybe it's decreasing a little bit, but they still want it. If you're seeing task avoidant behavior, like running away from the table, then that's definitely, or like, any type of like head down, all the behaviors that our kids engage in that are in their plans, that's definitely a sign that you're not being reinforcing enough. Or if you see the learner not engaged with the reinforcer, this is a review from last time, but if you see them just not engaging with it, then you definitely want to relook at what you're using. So if you're blowing bubbles and then they're not going after them or popping them, then that's a sign, or looking at them. You're going to want to play, like the whole size intensity thing. We asked that question, like, what's reinforcing for, what's a good size for a Skittle? And we said 1 Skittle, and then I said 1/8 of a Skittle. Really, that's individual to the learner, and it should be as small as possible. So you kind of need to play with that. And if you're giving like 1/10 of a Skittle, and the kid is like crying when you give it to them, maybe that's not a reinforcer. Maybe you need to use half Skittle, full Skittle. And then your other responsibility is to think about motivation. So if you're using edibles, we talked about this last time, but you want to think like, what time of day is it? It's like just after lunch. Maybe it won't work. You want to use the trampoline. Oh, my kid just came back from 90-degree weather at the park. On the other hand, you can use the same. You can flip it and try to find those times to their advantage. Like, so it's been raining for 3 days, and your kid probably hasn't gotten a chance to go outside. We have a slide here and a trampoline. Maybe those will be good reinforcers. Or it's just before lunch. Maybe that's a really good time to use those reinforcers. So this is a really, really important part. So you want to encourage new reinforcers. So this is just a review. We talked about how when you're using reinforcement during trials, you want to use a variety because it avoids satiation and it helps with that differential reinforcement where you can if I have 5 reinforcers, I can give them 3 of them at a big intensity for the best response, and then I can give them 1 of them, minimally for a response that just kind of meh. Or for an incorrect response, I could say no. So if we need that variety, a common difficulty with identifying reinforcing stimuli. Like, I can think of a couple kids where it's if you ask all the behavior technicians here, it's like, what's reinforcing for this one kid? And they can think of one thing. So if you have praise and one thing, then how are you going to get that differential? So a client who is motivated by multiple reinforcers will be in a much better position to make progress and to learn than a client with limited reinforcers. So that limited reinforcement hurts them in the natural environment, and it hurts them here. We don't just want to be okay, you like squishy balls, and you like to sit in the corner with it. We're trying to change that itself. We're not just trying to be and we want you to touch blue when we say blue, and then go play squishy ball. We want them to, we want to expand their reinforcers. So basically, the more reinforcers a client has, the better. If you think about it, think about the clients you've worked with. The ones who are more difficult, most usually more aggressive, more challenging behavior, are the ones with fewer reinforcers, and that's why. And they have a harder time learning. So again, with more reinforcers. Number 1, more reinforcers open the door to learning more skills because, our therapists have an easier time teaching when they can easily identify. If a kid shows up for their first session and they're like, I love trains, I'll do anything for trains, then, right away, okay, I'm going to be able to get a lot of learning from this kid because I know what they like. So also in the natural environment, more reinforcers leads to more learning. So, for example, if you can make winning a reinforcer, how does that benefit a kid?
A lot, honestly.
On the spot.
Well, if they like to win, then you let them win the game, and they'll be happy, and then they'll want to work again and play the same game.
Right, and there's learning to be done There's learning, and there's social learning that happens within games. So if a kid wants to win a game, they're gonna have to engage in appropriate social behavior. Otherwise, it's out of the game you go. And some games are educational games. You know what I mean? If a kid is motivated by just winning, you can play teacher-student game and be okay, every time I see you off task, I'm gonna give myself a point. Every time you're on task, I give you a point. And then they're just motivated to beat you. And you're just working. So it's ha-ha, gotcha. So if a kid is motivated, hearing music is a reinforcer. How could that make them more able to learn? Even if it was learning music.
Just hearing music is way reinforcing.
Yeah. And so a kid who is reinforced by music can, number 1, you can use that as a contrived reinforcer, and they can learn to play an instrument because it's now they hear the music when they behave in a certain correct way, whereas someone who doesn't care is just going to avoid the instrument altogether. Or even iPads are, screens are bad, but there's a lot of really great learning software, and so if the iPad itself is reinforcing and the kid can use it, they can learn. They can also use the iPad to communicate. So a kid with more reinforcers is going to have their the therapy environment here at Meaningful Day increase, and in the natural environment. And certain reinforcers are super, super effective in the natural environment, particularly praise, attention, social interaction, peer attention and interaction, and leisure activities. Because if you think about it, this is what we all, like, that's what it turns into. By the time you're in, like, 3rd grade, 4th grade, it's like the big reinforcer in school is recess, which is, like, time to go play with your friends, or time to engage in leisure activities. So, like, that's, you know, independent play, social play, and praise. So how do we identify new reinforcers? We went over this already, but it's basically observation, just kind of watch. And you can take your observation and say, like, oh, they like the trampoline. Maybe they like physical things in general. I'm going to try chair sprints. I'm going to try pulling on the scooter. I'm going to try, like, spinning around. I'm going to try, like, holding their hands and letting them fall and then pulling them back up. I'm going to try, you know, piggyback ride. So just because it doesn't mean observation, stand back and see, like, oh, they did these 3 things, so those 3 things are reinforcers. It's like, yes, there's that information, and then it's like, what else can I try? Try new things based on what you see through observation and just based on what your experience with other kids. And we have lists posted all around the buildings. Basically, just be creative and, like, open your eyes. So a therapist who can see a kid play on the trampoline and be like, oh, they like jumping, maybe they like physical things, maybe they would like, if it's a little kid and it's appropriate, like, you know, a horse ride on your leg. You know, maybe they like to be spun. That therapist is going to be a better service to that kid than someone who's like, oh, they must like the trampoline. So this is really how you create new reinforcers. So this is, I forget in the order if this definition has come up, but basically it's a procedure called pairing, and it's really called, like, stimulus pairing. But so the rule is if a stimulus is paired with an existing reinforcer, it becomes reinforcing by itself. And this is kind of just makes common sense based on life development. Like, for most little kids, their parents are reinforcers, just the sight of them. It's because everything good comes from their parents. Like, you know, from the time you're a baby, food, warmth, everything. And then this leads to, like, more. So what we want to focus on is the natural environment, which is, like, praise, attention, peers, and leisure skills. So this is a tip. The wannabe reinforcer should come just before the existing reinforcer. So in the discrete trial where it's like SD, response, consequence, what's the praise part? It's in the consequence, and it's when you say, like, good job, that was great, that was amazing. So if you have a kid who, for every kid, you should be aware. This is reinforcing enough, and this is all I need to do for a lot of trials, or I need to do something else for really good responses. So for a kid who, good job, is meaningless, the wannabe reinforcer, so say you want good job to be the reinforcer, and you know that tickles are the reinforcer, so it should come just before the existing reinforcer. So it looks like, you know, touch blue. Good job, tickle, 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 tickle. So, like, the praise comes, and then the real reinforcer comes. Eventually, good job, or whatever praise, and you want to, like, smile. You want to do whatever real people do in the natural environment when they give praise. Or even, like, a pat on the shoulder is, like, a natural environment reinforcer, praise. So you would be like, yeah, that was really good work. Pat, 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 tickle, 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 tickle. And what happens is, this is what Cooper mentioned earlier, you become a conditioned reinforcer because you're always giving the tickles, you're giving the candy, you're saying go take a break, you're saying let's go to the computer. So you're a lot of fun. You give the piggyback rides, like, you let them go on the trampoline.
Yes.
So eventually you become like, oh, I like this person. So creating new reinforcers. Another way to do it, a lot of the reason is because a lot of our kids don't have the skills to participate in the, like, you know, if you talk to, like, a 4th grade kid, like, baseball or softball might be a reinforcing activity for them. Like, they'll work to go participate in that. Baseball is a very complicated game for a kid with autism sometimes. So sometimes it's like a skill barrier. And sometimes it's not even, it is a skill thing, but it's like they don't have the skills because they don't even tolerate the activity. So, like, say, you know, playing with, like, what's that stuff that you make with cornstarch and water, and it's like oobleck. Yeah. Oh, I was blinded. Or gack, like playing those sensory things, that can be really reinforcing. But what if a kid, it's a versus them, they're scared of it? So, in those cases, it's like you just have to teach them to tolerate it and not avoid it, and maybe they'll start to like it. So, in a lot of situations, if you teach the skills, it opens up reinforcers. So, for example, if you teach reading, now it opens up books as a possible reinforcer, which wasn't before. Or if you teach, this is like with the softball, baseball, if you teach motor skills, like if you teach running the bases, if you teach swinging a bat, now it's a reinforcer. A lot of what happens with our kids on the playground is like, once you get to a certain age, it's the big game that everybody plays are like playground games. It's like tetherball and foursquare. And so if a kid doesn't have the motor skills to be successful at those games and they just lose, then those situations are not going to be reinforcing, and then they miss out on social opportunities. So sometimes it's a matter of teaching the skills. And so if this is the situation, then you treat potential reinforcing activity like work. So say you think that a kid would really like to play baseball if they could play, but they don't know the rules and they might not have the skills. So it's like, okay, you have a break, like let's swing 5 times, hit the bat, and you treat it like work until sometimes you see them catch on and actually like it. Like with the oobleck, if it's aversive, you treat it like work, and you'd be like, touch oobleck, touch finger.
Like
I was saying like the
gack.
yeah, like the cornstarch whatever stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, that could be very reinforcing, but for whatever reason it's yeah. Or what if a kid, like a lot of times puzzles are used as part of work. So maybe a kid has developed this pairing with puzzles. It's like puzzles are work, I don't like them, and really that's the only reason that they're a kid who would like puzzles. They could be reinforced by puzzles. So sometimes it's just a matter of like building tolerance and like breaking that aversion. And then the last part is you have to consider the appropriateness of reinforcement, which this is actually a big and common consideration for us, because a lot of our kids really, like, something's reinforcing, but it's like very, very socially inappropriate. Like, hand flapping in the corner like this is reinforcing.
Being 15, watching Barney.
Yeah, like watching Barney is reinforcing, or playing trains, but really trains involves like, sitting with your head like this and like spinning the wheels. Yeah. So a lot of our kids prefer activities that interfere with social engagement, such as like stereotypy, which is like anything repetitive, like the hand flapping or like the spinning the wheels. It's age inappropriate, like 15-year-olds watching Barney, adults watching Barney. Or sometimes it might be like the activity itself is fine, but it's very narrow. Like maybe they like to draw, but they always draw the same thing. And it's like that's their one interest, and it's usually you're worried about satiation, but it's like all they want to do is that, to the point where it's like you get a lot of behavior around it, stuff like that. On the other hand, these things, like if they're willing to engage in this so much, it's like it's a powerful reinforcer. So like that kind of sucks, and especially for kids who have limited reinforcers, it's like, well, what do? Can we still use these things? Do we have to be like, no, don't you have your only reinforcer, and then you're kind of like stuck as far as getting work out of them? So what do you do? So you kind of can still use these things. You just have to balance it out and find a way to like maybe teach the appropriate way to use that thing. So for example, say you have a 15-year-old who loves to watch Barney, and watch, YouTube, say it's YouTube videos. So you kind of sandwich structured access with unrestricted access. So you said, like, what do you want to work for? YouTube. Okay, that's fine. So then you think, like, well, what is the appropriate thing for a 15-year-old to be watching on YouTube? So you have that in mind. They just worked 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to earn the YouTube. Let it be a reinforcer. Let them watch, like, a minute of Barney. And then you say, like, okay, that was good. Now we're gonna teach what people really do with YouTube, and it's like, yeah, let's watch a funny YouTube video or a sports clip, something, and they get to do that, and then the reinforcer for that is, one more minute of Barney before they have to go back to work. So it's like you can use that like highly preferred activity to teach a related, more appropriate activity. And then what you're doing is pairing the Barney with the other activity because it predicts that last little chunk. And then it's like, okay, they're doing it, but they're doing something they weren't doing before that's more appropriate. And then you just work to lengthen the time of the appropriate. And it's like, okay, whatever you want to watch Barney, watch 2 minutes of Barney if you've watched, 5 minutes of something appropriate. And you can tolerate it, and you can, because then if this is a kid who is reinforced by peer attention, then that sports clip will start to like get its own reinforcers. Like there's reinforcers available there for like engaging with other peers and watching and commenting, and so like now maybe that will take off on its own. And you can pair appropriate with inappropriate to condition new reinforcers. So we have a kid who likes straws. Which is like, okay, I don't know, like what, okay, that's very, like, that's not going to get them a lot of, like, good social reinforcement out in the community and from their teachers and from anybody else. So he has a straw. You want to encourage other reinforcers, incorporate the straw into whatever other activity. Like, you want to teach them, like, oh, we're going to play trains, we're going to play food. Like, you can keep your straw, I'm not going to take it away. Because a lot of times that's the issue, too, is, like, kids have had things, like, taken away from them, and so now not having it becomes aversive. So if you pair the straw with, like, we're playing food and we're using the straw to, like, drink, and I have my straw too, now it's like, okay, food is fun. Now slowly food has been paired, and so maybe now we can think about, like, taking out the straw, and food alone is fun. Is this what I thought I had? What? Here, this one. Okay. Some things you want to just limit to appropriate quantity, like say hand flapping. If that's, or like, doing this, like maybe seeing the light, some of that gets into like an ethical issue of like, well, it's not, the reason we're trying to change these behaviors is because we want them to have like full lives and open the doors for other reinforcement and be able to participate in more and more independent settings. So for me to say like, no, that's too autism-y, it's kind of like, why? You know what I mean? So if you can get it to a point where it's like, okay, you did this, you did all these appropriate skills, you participated in all these appropriate things, like, go for it, you earned it. Because everybody has weird and appropriate things that they like.
Yeah.
So for some things and some types of stereotypy, it's more like you teach time and place than you just say, like, no, you can't do that. Like, for example, it's you don't hand flap while you're in the middle of like, being taught at the table, but, like, or in the middle of, a social group, but you can do it now. And then you can use, a lot of our kids have, like, obsessive interests or, like, very restricted interests. So you can use that to work on flexibility and turn taking. So say you have a kid who likes Where's Waldo, and all they want to talk about is Where's Waldo, and like to read, or Titanic. Say you have a kid who talks about the Titanic.
I can picture that. Yeah.
So you can use that to work on. So when do you talk about Titanic? What's the issue with that? It's like everybody has these interests where it's like it's an interest. But the main point is, like, you have to be able, you can't let it dominate a conversation, for example. So it use that interest to say, like, okay, we get to talk about what you want for 1 minute, and then we get to talk about what I want for a minute. And they have to be okay with that transition, and they have to participate when I'm talking in it, and then we go back. So it's like, yeah, it's not the most appropriate thing, but at least you get to work, you're working on some other, what's the appropriate version of that, and, like, how, it's not about, like, you can't ever talk about that. It's like you have to do it in an appropriate quantity to where it's not going to, like, alienate you completely. And for a lot of kids, what's nice is we can just, if they do have other reinforcers, you can just say, like, hey, you picked that last time. Let's not, Because computer is something that a lot of our kids, like, computer, and they'll want to pick it every time. For a lot of our kids, we can just say, like, you just did that pick, here's this list of things. Oh, you only get to pick the computer 3 times. Because we don't, like, it goes back to the variety where Sometimes just engaging in the activity opens the door for like, oh, now that I think this is fun, because I have social interaction, I'm getting these things from an interaction. Like, for example, if it's like, I don't want to play Sorry, and the kids never played Sorry before, they don't realize that they like it, yeah. So sometimes it's just a matter of like, no, you have to do it. I misspelled cheese. And so review, therapist responsibilities. Always be assessing whether or not you're reinforcing. And the main way you do this is preference assessment. You want to encourage new reinforcers that are age appropriate and naturally occurring. So you want to identify them and create them. And you create them by pairing, pick what they already like and incorporate it into a new activity. And if you come across something where they don't like doing it, maybe treat it, if you have extra time, you run some programs like, oh, I'm going to teach you how to draw you like to draw, all you ever draw is a house every single time. I'm going to teach you, like, okay, draw a car, and then you can draw a house. Okay, cool, draw a tree, and then you can draw a house. Okay, cool, draw your family, and then you can draw a house. So sometimes you have to treat it like that, treat it a little bit like work. Sometimes it's a matter of just exposing kids to something. So if they don't like social group, it's like, okay, we'll play for 5 turns and then we can go, if you can play appropriately. And then you want to consider the appropriateness. So think like, yes, this is a reinforcer. If you think it might, cause them to run into trouble in other settings and other areas, maybe think about like, well, how can I kind of like tweak this so it's more appropriate? And that's it.